I'm 25 years old, and I've lived in Michigan my whole life. I grew up in the suburbs of Grand Rapids, but I usually try to get away from people at least once or twice a year. Last month, I decided to take a solo camping trip up to the Huron-Manistee National Forests. I had a week off from my job at a logistics company, and I just wanted to clear my head. I packed my old Ford Ranger with my gear, a basic one-person tent, a Coleman stove, a cooler full of food, and my hiking stuff. I've done this plenty of times before, so I wasn't really worried about being alone in the woods. I left on a Tuesday morning. I drove north on US 131 and eventually got onto some of the back roads near the Manistee River. Before I hit the actual Forest Service roads, I stopped at a small convenience store to grab some extra ice and a couple of gallons of water. It's the one with the faded red siding and the old-fashioned gas pumps that don't have the digital screens on them. The guy behind the counter didn't say much, and I didn't either. I just paid for my stuff and kept going. I found a spot about 3 miles off the main gravel road. It wasn't an official campsite, just a flat clearing near a bend in the river that people clearly used sometimes because there was a small ring of stones for a fire. It was a nice spot. The trees were mostly pine and some birch, and the ground was covered in a thick layer of needles. I set up my tent, got my bear bag hung up in a tree about 50 yards away, and spent the evening just sitting by the water. Everything felt normal. The first strange thing happened on Wednesday morning. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper, especially when it's cool outside. I woke up around 7 a.m. because the sun was hitting the side of my tent. When I went to reach for my boots, which I always leave in the little vestibule area, that's the space between the tent mesh and the outer rainfly, they weren't there. I thought maybe I had just been tired and left them outside the night before, even though that's not something I usually do because of the dew. I unzipped the tent and looked around. My boots were sitting about 5 feet away from the tent. They weren't just tossed there. They were placed side by side, perfectly neat, and they were pointing directly toward the thickest part of the woods to the north. I figured maybe a raccoon or something had tried to drag them off, though it was weird that they were so orderly. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just put them on, made some coffee, and went for a hike. That night, I made sure to put my boots inside the vestibule again. I even made a point of tucking them right up against the zipper of the inner tent. I went to sleep around 10 p.m. I didn't hear anything during the night. No footsteps, no brush moving, nothing. On Thursday morning, the same thing happened. I woke up, reached for my boots, and they were gone. I unzipped the rainfly and looked out. This time, the boots were about 10 feet away from the tent. Again, they were perfectly aligned, side by side, pointing exactly the same direction as the day before, due north, straight into the trees. I stood there in my socks for a minute, just looking at them. There was no dew on the boots, which was odd because the grass and the top of my tent were soaking wet. It was like they had been moved very recently, or they had been kept under cover until just before I woke up. I walked over and checked the ground around the boots. The pine needles were undisturbed. There were no footprints from a person, and there were no paw prints from an animal. It was just my boots sitting there on the ground. I started to feel a bit uneasy, but I tried to rationalize it. I thought maybe I was sleepwalking. I've never sleepwalked in my life, as far as I know, but I've heard that stress or a change in environment can trigger it. I'm 25, and I've been working a lot of overtime lately, so I figured maybe my brain was just acting out. I decided that for the next night, I would put the boots inside the actual tent with me, at the bottom of my sleeping bag. I spent Thursday afternoon fishing in the river. I didn't catch anything. I ended up driving back out to the main road to find a place to eat because I didn't feel like cooking. I went to a small diner about 20 minutes away. It's a white building with a green roof and a gravel parking lot that's always full of pickup trucks. I sat at the counter and had a burger. I almost asked the waitress if there had been any weird reports of people messing with campers in the area, but I felt stupid even thinking it. It was just a pair of boots moving a few feet. It wasn't like I was being attacked. When I got back to my camp, it was getting dark. I checked my gear and everything seemed fine. Nothing else had been touched. My cooler was still closed, my bear bag was still high up in the tree, and my tent was exactly how I left it. I climbed inside, pulled my boots off, and stuffed them into the bottom of my sleeping bag. I zipped the tent up tight, and even tied the two zippers together with a piece of paracord. I figured if I was sleepwalking, I'd have to wake up to untie the knot and unzip the tent. I had a hard time falling asleep that night. Every time a branch snapped or the wind picked up, I was wide awake. Eventually, I must have drifted off. I woke up on Friday morning around 6:30 a.m. The first thing I did was feel for my boots at the bottom of the sleeping bag. They were gone. My heart started beating a bit faster, but I stayed still for a second. I looked at the tent zippers. The paracord knot I had tied was gone. Not cut, just untied. The zippers were closed, but they weren't pulled all the way to the bottom like I'd left them. I got out of my sleeping bag and opened the tent. This time, I didn't even have to look around. My boots were about 20 yards away, right at the edge of the clearing where the woods get really dense. They were sitting on a flat log. Again, they were perfectly neat, side by side, pointing north. I walked over to the log. It was a long walk in just socks over the pine needles and small twigs. When I got to my boots, I noticed something else. There was a small pile of acorns sitting right on the tongue of the left boot. They were arranged in a little circle. I stood there for a long time, looking into the woods. It's very thick in that part of the forest. Lots of low-hanging branches and scrub brush. You can't see more than 20 feet in. I didn't hear anything, and I didn't see anyone. I checked the ground around the log, but it was the same as before. No tracks. No signs of anyone walking through the brush. I didn't stay for the rest of the trip. I went back to my tent, packed everything up as fast as I could, and threw it all into the back of my truck. I didn't even bother folding the tent properly. I just stuffed it in. I drove back out to the gravel road and didn't stop until I got to a large gas station with a blue and white sign near the highway entrance. I bought a coffee and sat in my truck for a while, just trying to think about what had happened. I've been home for 2 weeks now. I've talked to a few friends about it, and they all say the same things I thought of. They think someone was messing with me, or that I was sleepwalking and doing it myself. One of my buddies joked that maybe a very organized bear was trying to tell me which way to hike. But the thing is, I checked the paracord I used to tie the zippers. I found it later, sitting on the floor of my truck. The ends of the cord weren't frayed, and the knot hadn't been forced. It had been untied properly. If I was sleepwalking, I would have had to untie a complex knot in total darkness, move my boots 20 yards away, arrange them perfectly on a log, find some acorns, arrange those in a circle, and then come back and zip the tent back up, all without waking myself up or leaving any tracks in the soft dirt near the river. I also thought about the possibility of it being another person. But why would someone do that? They didn't take anything. I had a relatively expensive camera sitting right in the vestibule the first night, and they didn't touch it. My wallet was in my pants at the foot of my sleeping bag. Nothing was stolen. they just moved the boots. The more I think about it, the more I wonder about the direction they were pointing. Every single time, they were pointing north, deeper into the forest. It felt less like a prank and more like a suggestion or a prompt, like something wanted me to go that way. I don't think I'll be going back to that specific part of the Manistee Forest anytime soon. I still have the boots, and I've been checking them every morning since I got back to my apartment in Grand Rapids. They haven't moved once. They're always right where I leave them by the door. I'm trying to tell myself there's a logical explanation. Maybe the wind was catching the tent in a weird way. Or maybe I really am a very talented sleepwalker who can untie knots and navigate woods in the dark. But honestly, I don't really believe that. It just doesn't feel right. I've spent a lot of time in the woods, and I know what it feels like when things are normal. This wasn't that. Anyway, I just wanted to write this down somewhere. Maybe someone else has had something similar happen in the Michigan woods, or maybe I'm just overthinking a weird week in the trees. Either way, I think I'll stick to more populated campgrounds for a while.